it is the most critical chapter, so we split it into two sections. So, so here's that term again, seller sub-agency. And one form of seller sub-agency is just what we described, where we have an agent working for a firm that has a client that's selling a house, right? And then we have another agent that is working with a buyer but not for the buyer. And so this firm then becomes a sub-agent of the seller. Just like this agent was a sub-agent of the seller. So this broker is not working for this buyer customer. They're working for the seller over here. They're a sub-agent of the seller. And this situation doesn't happen a whole lot, but I will tell you that different firms handle this in different ways. Allen Tate does not allow a RE/MAX agent to work for their seller. The only people that can work with a buyer are buyer agents that are working for a different firm. Why do we do that? Because we can't assure that this broker is going to treat our seller fairly, right? We don't know what kind of training this broker has had. And maybe they don't really know what they're doing. And so we're not going to let them work for our seller. Now, some companies will allow this situation here, but Allen Tate does not. So we just said, if you're working with a buyer, let's say you work for Yost & Little, or Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, if you work for BHHS and you're working with a buyer, you better be working for the buyer when you bring them to an Allen Tate house and want to sell that house. So some firms will allow seller sub-agency, Allen Tate does not. Now, we do allow seller sub-agency within the firms, right? So all of the brokers within our firm are seller sub-agents. Make sense? Yeah.
Is each Allen Tate office, is it like?
Independently owned?
Yeah.
No. They're all one firm. And if you were paying attention to the business news this last week, you might have read that a big firm has merged with Allen Tate, a firm called Howard Hanna, which has offices all up in the northern and Midwest, has merged with Allen Tate. So Allen Tate's going to keep their name down here, but we're actually combined with this Howard Hanna. I don't even know what that means at this point, but in either case, we can work with for the seller. All of the agents of our firm are seller sub-agents, but it can't be a RE/MAX or a BHHS agent working with that seller. So, back in the 1960s when we had this situation, like Bonnie and Alan, who did a fine job, by the way, the buyers were confused. Frankly, they didn't know who was working for whom. And so they thought they had a relationship with this broker that was taking care of them. In fact, in 1983, they did a survey of buyers and sellers. 57% of the buyers they believed their agent represented them, but they didn't. Everybody worked for the seller. 31% of buyers working with a listing agent thought that the listing agent represented them. The listing agent works for the seller, right? 73% of buyers claim that they told their agent the maximum price they could afford to pay. Might that be helpful to the seller to know what the maximum that a buyer is willing to 70% of the buyers thought that whatever they told their agent was confidential. In fact, if they were doing it right, these seller sub-agencies were required to tell the seller anything they found out from the buyer that could help that seller. Required, because it was their fiduciary duty to that seller. And 74% of all sellers interviewed thought that the selling sub-agent represented the buyer and not them. So even the sellers were confused. That agent was supposed to be working with them. So then the Edina lawsuit came along. Edina was a real estate firm, and basically the buyer was under the impression that an agent was working for her, but he was not. And there was a class action lawsuit. So there wasn't just one person that felt this way, but in fact 20,000 customers of the Edina company, they asked for $250 million from this one firm. They didn't get it, they only got $19.9 million. But that was enough for people to wake up and go, whoa, this is not good. This is not a good situation. So the buyer's rights need to be protected. We need to look out for buyers as well as sellers.
Wayne, do you remember what time frame that was?
what's that?
1983? 91, it says.
91 was the Edina Edina lawsuit, I believe. Let me see if I double check that.
1936.
Yeah.
95 was when the judge was
So in 1995, well, before I get to that, remember caveat emptor? You remember that term? About the buyer beware, right? So the common law, the doctrine said it's up to the buyer to figure out this stuff. And the fact is, though, that the buyers are depending on their agent. They're depending on this person showing them the house to collect that information. If they're working for the seller, if that broker is working for the seller, then they're not going to give them that information. And that just wasn't going to work. So the North Carolina and other states said, we got to do something about this. So the first thing they did, they didn't create buyer's agency right away. The first thing they did was say, well, we're going to give a disclosure so that buyers know who the broker is working for. And so this was the disclosure. When showing you property or assisting you in the purchase of property, the above referenced agent and firm will be representing the interest of the seller. As such, the firm and its agents must work to obtain from the seller, for the seller, the best price and terms possible. The firm and its agents must also furnish the seller any information obtained from you or any other source which is material to the transaction or which might influence the seller's decision to sell. Therefore, as a buyer, you should not give the seller's agent any information that you do not want the seller to know. Now, can you imagine if your broker hands you this disclosure and says you need to sign at the bottom of this? And you're like, you're working for the seller? Yeah, sorry. So there was no buyer's agency. This is what they had to sign. So they wanted to at least warn the buyers that, they better be careful what they say. Well, that's better than nothing, but not much better than nothing, right? So then buyer agency was born. So buyer agency, here we have a wall of separation. We have the listing agreement between the principal, the seller, and their listing firm, the agent. And then we have the buyer's agent who's working for the buyer, which would be the selling firm. And this is confusing, the selling thing. When I say I'm the seller's agent, I'm the selling agent, I really mean the buyer's agent, because we're selling a home. We're helping them buy this home, but don't worry about that. So buyer sub-agent working as a sub-agent of this buyer. The buyer's agent is actually the firm, but they're looking at, these two firms are looking out for different clients. So they're looking out for the best interest, the fiduciary relationship, means they're looking out for the best interests of their client. So that's a little different than the scenario that we just gave. Now we can protect the buyers because we have this wall of separation. So when I have a buyer and I call up the listing agent and I say, or the listing broker, and I say, hey, I've got a buyer for your property, I'm not gonna tell that broker what the maximum that my buyer can afford, right? Now, I might try to get as much information as I can, why is the seller selling that house? Oh, well, they're moving in with their kids. Their kids live down in Florida and they're moving down there to be closer to their grandchildren, whatever. Is this helpful to know as a buyer's agent? Sure. They're motivated, right? They got grandchildren down there. So the house has been on the market for 6 months and they got these grandchildren getting older by the minute. That's a good thing to know, right? So that, and as the seller's agent, I gotta be protective of that information. So they say, why is the seller moving? I say, well, they haven't given me permission to release that information. Okay. So agency choices, as I've said earlier, some companies choose not to allow sub-agency of the seller from other firms. That's a choice that Alan Tate made. Everybody has to decide how are they going to work. Are they going to work just with buyers? I know there are firms out there that only work with buyers. That's a tough road to hoe. I know people ask me all the time, would you prefer to work with buyers or sellers? What do you think I'd tell them? Well, the fact is, I love working with buyers. Buyers are always happy. You find the house, they're excited about moving in. They got this good deal on the house, and they're just really excited. They're anxious to move. They're almost always happy. Sellers, on the other hand, let's say the house is listed for $100,000 and you get $99,999, and the seller's like, couldn't you get another dollar? They've allowed the floor to rot through, and they're like, you mean they're asking for the floor to be fixed? I've lived with this hole in my floor for 10 years now. It's not a problem, right? So sellers are not always happy, right? So, but the fact is, I can't make a living only working with buyers, because I can only haul around one buyer at a time. I can, show them all around Greensboro. I can take them to a million different houses, but I can only do that with one person at a time. Now there are places where, like when the foreclosure crisis was going on, there were like buses in some towns that they would take buyer clients around to all the foreclosure houses. That's brilliant. I don't know if you thought of that, but as far as I know, in Greensboro, people only work with one client at a time. But if I'm working with listings, I can have 50 listings all marketing at the same time. And every one of those listings might be bringing me buyers as well. And so, the saying goes, you got to list to last. You got really, listing houses it really helps to keep your business rolling, because you can have lots of houses listed. Well, that sounds good, but right now, you got a lot of people sitting on interest rates of 2.5%, 3%. And they're like, yeah, I know this house is too big for us, but why would I sell it now? Because if I sell it, I'm going to have to get a 5% loan. So, and I've got a bunch of stuff to fix because HGTV told me that I gotta have granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. HGTV has ruined real estate as far as I'm concerned. So, how will the firm cooperate with other firms? All of this is in a written policy, and of course, usually the broker in charge is involved in maintaining that all the brokers that are in the firm are paying attention to the rules that they've established. And so, in our firm, one of the great things about working for a bigger company is you have lots of eyes looking out. And it's not like they're, spying on you or anything, but like, for instance, when I turn my paperwork in, not only does my assistant look at the paperwork before it's turned in, but also the office manager looks at the paperwork to make sure that it's done right. And they check all the boxes to make sure all of the papers that need to be turned in are turned in. And then I have if it's a contract, that I've got a photocopy of the checks and things like that. So making sure that I'm following the rules, because that keeps me out of trouble. Where agents get in trouble sometimes is if it's a small firm and nobody's looking out for those things and details get missed and paperwork isn't done right, or money's not accounted for correctly, then they get into trouble. So essentially, all of that has to be part of the company policy. How does it work in our firm? And that Vic, the broker in charge, is going to make sure all that goes well. So whenever we're dealing with an agency situation, if I'm working for the seller, we want to make sure that any buyer that comes along knows who I'm working with. There's nothing worse than secret agency. That is, somebody thinks that I'm working for them, but I'm really working for somebody else. That's a really bad situation. Or they think you're working for them and you act like you're working for them. You show them property. You tell them about the houses. You tell them about that asbestos siding and the buried oil tank and all of that, and they think you're working for them, and they start treating you like you're an agent. Pretty soon, legally, you could actually be considered their agent, but you're not. You don't have an agency agreement, and that's undisclosed agency, which is a bad thing. So we'll talk about that in more detail later. So review of the customer at first substantial contact. We're going to talk about this whole idea of agency disclosure in more detail later, but first substantial contact. When does that happen?
First meeting. Start giving you personal information.
Yeah. So I'm at the open house. Somebody comes in. They say, "How many bedrooms does this have?" I'll say 4. Have I made substantial contact with them? No. They say, how old is this house? Oh, it's 33 years old. Have I made substantial contact with them? No. They say, you know what school district is this in? Because my kids are in the Page High School district, and I really want to keep them in that school district. Have I found the first substantial contact? The answer there is yes. Because if I know that this person is looking for a house in this school district, that's helpful to me, right? It's because we've gone from property to people. Their child is a people, contrary to popular belief. Their child is the people, and we've started talking about that. Maybe they talk about the fact that they just got this big inheritance from grandma, right? And so they got money to spend on a big, nice house. Because they've been living in this little bitty house, and they'll start rattling on, and you're like, oh, hold on. I need to let you know, I'm working for the seller, and anything you say can and will be used against you. The fact is, I want to protect you from saying something that could hurt you if you decide to make an offer on this house. Now, what have I done? I have started a relationship with them because I stopped them and said, I don't want you to get hurt. I want you to be okay if you decide to make an offer on this house. And that is the beginnings of a relationship. Now, it may not go any further than that, but if they decide to hire me as a buyer's agent, and now I'm a dual agent, which we'll talk about later, working for both the buyer and the seller, they know that I'm looking to protect them, even though I'm still working for the seller too. And I'm going to be fair and balanced with my treatment of these two parties. So, for a substantial contract, just remember property to people. So I said that, you know, real estate is always changing, that it used to be that brokers were the keeper of all this information, but we're no longer that data source. There's plenty of information out there. They can get it on the internet. So the multiple listing services were created to give some of that information, to make it more available. Now, it didn't start out going to the public. It started out basically to share information from one brokerage firm to another. So when I started in business, really, this was starting to get computerized and so forth, so we could see all of the information, but it wasn't out there like Realtor.com and Truly and Zillow and Valentate.com, all of that. We just had the information available from the other firms, so we knew what was available. And so then our buyers would say, well, I'm looking for a 4-bedroom house, blah, 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 this neighborhood, so forth. And we'd come up with a list of homes to show them. We held all of the cards. Now, my buyers call me up and they say, there's a new house over in Sunset Hills and it just came on the market this morning about an hour ago, and can we go see it now? And you're like, well, okay. Or I can't go see it right now, but I can see it in 2 hours from now. So they have much of that information. So the thing about the multiple listing services, it basically allows firms to share information, to cooperate with each other. But it also has information about how much we are willing to cooperate financially too. So if I list a house for 6% or 7%, I put in the multiple listing service that I'm willing to give buyer's agents, the firms, let's say 3%, and that's in the listing. So everybody knows how much I'm going to provide to an agent that shows this property. And so we're cooperating and we're also compensating. That's what the multiple listing service does. It's a database, so we're sharing information, but it's also about compensation. I'll show you an example, our Triad MLS. So when I go into the MLS, it looks something like this. And so, let's see. Let's just take a look. These are the new listings that have just been listed. And I'll just pick one. Let's see here. Find one in Greensboro. I don't see any in Greensboro. There's one. How about Fisher Park? Nice little $795,000 place, suite. Yeah, looks just like my house.
Except you have better windows.
I have really good windows. I don't have that though, but yeah. That's nice, $795,000. But look at the very bottom. Here, Yost and Little, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Yost and Little Realty. If you decide to join BHHS, just be prepared to have a really long company name. But there, right down here it says compensation, 3%. And so that's where we put how much we're offering to other agents. So you can do the math. If you sell it for the list price of $795,000, that's a big chunk of change, right? Not very many $795,000 houses in Greensboro. So most of the time we sell, a lot less than that. Now, not every house is listed for 3%. That is, don't offer 3%. You'll see anything from nothing. Can you imagine? An agent wants you to show their houses and they're offering 0%. You need to get it from your buyer. They're not offering any money. I've had it happen, believe me. There's some snakes out there. But some listings, if you got a $2 million property, they may have negotiated a little bit less commission, but 1.5% of $2 million is still a whole lot of money. So you'll see all different ranges. And it's really funny because we don't like to talk about commission, especially if there's a room full of realtors and somebody says, what are you charging for that house or whatever? Everybody goes, oh, because we're not supposed to talk with other firms about what we charge for commission. And that's because we don't want collusion. We don't want all the firms getting together and deciding, hey, we're going to charge 6% or 7% or whatever. So theoretically, each firm decides how much they're going to charge. So when people ask me, well, how much do you charge to list a house? I'll say, well, Allen Tate charges X for this price home. I don't say this is the average in our market or this is what we normally charge here in Greensboro or anything like that. So anyway, my purpose was to show you how we let people know what that compensation is going to be. And of course, appraisers use this information as well. So they look for comparable properties. And we use this to decide how much we should list a house for by looking for comparable properties. And that analysis of all of those helps us to do that. So certainly there are other choices other than just seller agency anymore. Now we have buyer's agency. So the question becomes, do they need us? Do the buyers need us? They've got all the information out there. I see you shaking your head no. I say they need us because there's so much information. There's a lot of information out there. So, I think about this example. Can I go on the internet and find information, let's say, about appendectomies? How to do an appendicitis. If somebody has appendicitis, can I find information on the internet about that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I found that. No, I'm not going to show you. So yeah, there's information out there about how to do an appendectomy. But would you trust somebody who read a website about doing appendectomies to do? No. It's complicated, right? It's complicated. And real estate is complicated too. I didn't know anything about lead-based paint before I got into real estate, even though I bought a house that was built before 1978, right? Now, I probably signed a lead disclosure somewhere, but I don't remember doing that. I didn't know about a lot of things that I learned over time being in real estate. And it's up to me to help buyers and sellers to learn that information too. But we do a lot of consulting, a lot of interpretation of the information. So they can find information about houses, but they may not know how to interpret it. They may not know, if they're looking for houses in a particular area, they may not know that, well, sure, this is a great neighborhood, but that section over there has, has these wires going over it, right? That people don't like very much. So that may not be as good an investment. Or maybe there's a loop a northern loop going right by the house, which may or may not be an issue for some people. I live in Battle Forest neighborhood, which just so happens to butt up against the northern loop where they're building it off of, Battleground and Old Battleground, that area. So we've known that that freeway was going in for 30 years. It's a whole different thing when they're bulldozing down the trees and laying concrete and all that. And so now people are looking at it going, oh, why? Is this gonna affect my property value? The fact is, it's already affected the property value. It has for 30 years. People have said, well, there's gonna be a freeway there, so these houses aren't worth as much. Or you could look at it as, these houses are a really good deal, because they're less expensive than the house over here. And when this freeway goes in, it's gonna be really convenient to get to other places. Have any of you traveled on the loop now from Battleground all the way over to the west? Or maybe taking that little segment that goes from 85, 40, over to 29. It's a little segment that goes up on the east side. It's pretty cool. It's pretty fast. So I'm looking forward to it being finished. All right. So let's go back and look at this idea of old car in more specific. So we owe all these duties to our clients, these duties. And the first of these is obedience. So a fiduciary relationship, the agent has to act with competency and good faith and according to the principal's instructions. Can you do anything that the client wants you to do? I see some of you shaking your heads. What can I do? I can do anything that my client asks me to do, right? No. What can't I do? I can't do anything that's illegal, right? I can't do anything that's illegal. So I can do any legal acts that my client asks me to do. If my client says, don't show this house to any Oriental person, is that okay?
No.
No, because it's illegal, right? But if they say, don't show this to anybody with pink hair, is that illegal? No. It's not a protected class, right? So if they said nobody with pink hair gets in this house, you could do that. Now, probably you'd want to have a discussion, say, look, there's people with pink and blue hair and, lots of different colors, and they have money too. So maybe, you're moving out, what do you care what color their hair is, really? Come on. I have people that say, don't put a sign in front of the yard. Why don't you want a sign in front of the yard? Because my neighbors are good, they're nosy neighbors. And you say, well, nosy neighbors have friends and relatives that want to live in your house. And you're moving out anyway, so you're not going to be neighbors with them anymore. So one of the best ways to let people know that your house is on the market is to put a sign in front, for goodness sakes, right? So yeah, we can do anything, that is legal. And in fact, the book points out the fact that doing something illegal is not good for your client, because your client can get sued for an illegal act by their agent. And so if you're doing stupid stuff, your client might get sued too. So that's not a good thing. You're not acting as a fiduciary in that case. So legal acts only. Loyalty. So we place the client's needs above all else, including our own needs. And so, we talked about a lowered price, that sort of thing. Would it be is it okay, for instance, let's say your dad is looking for a house. Would it be okay for your dad to look at the house that you have listed? Yeah. Would it be in your client's best interest to sell the house to your dad? Yeah. But if it's your dad, you may have some divided loyalty, right? But the fact is, you can't, well, maybe not. Maybe you don't like your dad that much.
Oh, that's
But-
tough love, it's okay.
But the fact is that you need to disclose to your seller that it's my dad that's, coming to see the house. And make sure that they know that that's your dad, because they want to be, you want to make sure that they're fully informed. But your loyalty is still to that client, regardless of who it is that you're showing. You have, difficult situations like that where, you have relatives or friends or something like that that want to look at one of your listings, or you're working with a relative or a friend, and they're looking at this house, and then all of a sudden they see one of your listings, or even one of the firm's listings. It doesn't have to be your personal listing. It can be anybody that's working with the firm. You owe your fiduciary duties to that client, because they're the client of the whole firm, right? And so you have to be careful about that. Make sure that your loyalty is there. Yeah.
So if you were listing your dad's house, so where would you write that at? Like on the MLS?
Yes,
So you would
yes.
have to-
So oftentimes you'll see in the MLS, broker is related to the seller,
Okay.
or broker has a relationship with the seller. So, yeah, it would be right in the MLS. Sometimes it would be in the agent-only notes, not necessarily in the public-facing notes, but it has to be disclosed. So, if you don't disclose those things, you can get in lots of trouble. You could lose the listing, you could be be sued for monetary damages. You could have the real estate commission discipline you for screwing up. Lots of different things. The most important thing is no self-dealing here. You can't help yourself when you're dealing with a client. So, negotiating sales contracts without regard to the commission. It doesn't matter that you're going to get a little bit less. It's an incremental change anyway. What if the broker wants to buy a house that's listed with their firm? Can they do that? Sure. You just have to disclose, right? You have to disclose your interest in, it can't be a blind buyer. So, Sam Smith or something on the contract, it has to be disclosed that this is a broker within the firm. And brokers, let's say that I have my house listed, my own personal house listed. Can I work with a buyer's agent, as a buyer's agent for somebody buying my house? No. Because it's impossible for me to be, objective about that, right? It's my house. So, I could sell the house to them, but I couldn't act as their buyer's agent. Okay, so I could act as a seller sub-agent, basically working for myself, but I couldn't work as a buyer's agent in that case. Disclosure. This has to do with, information about the house, all material facts, anything that would affect a buyer or seller's decision to purchase the house. And on page 141 is some examples. Let's look at that real quick. Page 141 in your textbook. Some facts that you'd want to disclose. So, On page 141, 2/3 of the way down, it says all offers. This sounds funny. Somebody makes an offer on a house, why would the broker not disclose it? Well, because they were a stupid offer, right? So I've got my house I've got a listing for 300,000, and somebody comes along and says, hey, we'll give you 100,000 for that, right? I wanna say, that's a stupid offer. I'm not gonna give that to my seller, but guess what? You have to, regardless. Somebody rides by on a bicycle and says, how about 125? Guess what? You gotta disclose that to your seller. All offers, no matter how stupid they are. I've had brokers say, I'm not gonna take that offer to my seller. And you have to remind them, wait a minute, there's a rule about this that says you have to make this offer. Now, it's not usually as crazy as 100,000 for a $300,000 house, but in this market, which is a seller's market right now, things are moving quickly. Maybe a silly offer might be 10% off the list price when we got multiple offers and all this kind of people offering more than list price. So if somebody comes along and says, well, I'll give you 90% of the list price, I'm not even gonna bother with that. Well, you have to at least disclose the offer. The identity of the prospective purchasers, even if it's, if you're working with some star. I used to give examples, but all the examples that I gave were dated, so the young people, they're like, who's Tom Cruise? I never heard of him. Anyway, so the ability of the purchaser to complete the sale or offer a higher price. So if I know something about the purchaser, they just won the lottery, I saw it on the news. They won the lottery, they can afford to buy this house for more than that. I need to tell my seller. Any relationship the broker has with the buyer, such as an agreement for the broker to manage the buyer's property after its purchase. So if you have a relationship with this buyer, you better disclose it to your seller. The buyer's intention to resell the property for profit. Why would that matter? Well, it might not matter too much to the seller, but if they know that they're gonna resell it for a profit, we know that they're gonna try to get a really low price, right? So they can make more money on it. That's an important thing for the seller to know. So disclosure. We'll talk later about the property disclosure. The seller has an opportunity to disclose stuff about the house. Do they have to? The answer is no, they really don't. They have the opportunity, but they don't have to disclose. They can say no representation, which means I ain't saying one way or another. Are there any leaks in the plumbing? I ain't saying one way or another. Is the roof leaking? I ain't saying one way or another. Most lawyers will check no representation all the way down. They don't want to say one way or another. They don't want to be trapped in whatever they're saying. But the fact is, most buyers want to know. And if the seller isn't disclosing, then, well, they might be a little suspicious of that. But as far as the real estate broker, if I know about it, as the listing agent, I gotta tell them. So if it's got a leaky roof, I gotta tell them. If it's got a foundation problem, I gotta let them know. Even if the seller says, don't tell anybody, I have to remind them that I can't do that. If it's a material fact, I have to tell them. So this confidentiality. This is a key part of this fiduciary relationship. You're gonna know a lot about your clients. I mean a lot, way more than you wanna know. So, you start talking to them, they'll tell you about their financial situation, you're gonna find out about their health, their relationships, maybe their marriage is struggling and they're deciding to get divorced and what have you. You're gonna know a lot more than you really wanna know. And so what's important is that you keep confidential the things that you're supposed to keep confidential, not material facts about the house and so forth, but the stuff that can help this other party, that has to do with those relationships and financial information, all that. You can't disclose that, you have to keep it confidential. So, accounting. This has to do with money, basically, right? So, once, I think it's once a quarter, once every couple of months, the Real Estate Commission comes out with a, like a newsletter. And, well, I guess now it's electronic, but it used to come in the mail. And at the very back of this, this newsletter, it has a list of all of the real estate brokers who've gotten in trouble in North Carolina. And so when you get this bulletin from the Real Estate Commission, everybody goes to the back of the bulletin immediately and looks to see if any of their friends are listed in there, right? Or maybe their competition. And the most frequent reason why they're in trouble is having to do with this accounting. So, you know, you got a little firm, maybe it's just you, or maybe you and your husband or wife, one other broker, and it's been kind of rough lately, maybe not selling as many houses, and you've collected due diligence money, or you've collected earnest money rather, and put it in a trust account, right? And that earnest money is held on behalf of the buyer until it goes to closing. But you know what? The electric bill's coming up, and you don't have the money in your general account to pay for that. So let's just, you know, we'll just borrow it for a little bit, because we're gonna have a closing pretty soon. We'll make up for that. So they take the money out of the trust account to pay the electric bill, or to pay the rent, or to pay their agent, right? And that's a no-no. That's what we call commingling of funds. And that commingling of the general ledger and the trust fund is what gets a lot of people in trouble. Probably more than anything else, any of the other rules. So, I want to make sure that, you know, you've got copies of checks, and you can show where all of this money went. Keep your docs for at least 3 years. If you're a real estate broker, you want to keep your records so that you've got that. And the last one is just reasonable skill, care, and diligence. They expect you to have the experience, or at least the information, to protect them, to make sure that you know, as a buyer's agent, you have enough information to help them find a house that's safe, that's healthy, just going to keep them healthy. And you want to do your due diligence when you're listing a house to make sure you discover all of the things that you need to discover. Can you provide your seller with a market value of their house? Can you provide your seller with that? Give them a value? Yeah, sure. Measure a house? Can you measure a house? Absolutely. Can you accept an offer for them? No. So our reasonable skill and care, we can give them lots of information, but we can't make any decisions for them. They decide who they sell their house to, right? They decide how much they're going to sell their house. I can tell you time and time again, we tell them, you know, here your house is worth X. And they say, yeah, well, I think it's worth X plus 2% or 10%. I have a listing right now that just went under contract. We had it listed for about 5 months in a dynamite market. Everything was selling like hotcakes. They wanted more money than what it really was worth. And I struggled to get them to lower the price. And so they lowered it just enough to get it sold. But it took a while. All right, so I think I've had enough. I don't know about you. You want to go another hour maybe? Has everybody initialed the sign up sheet? So made it all the way back? Did you fill in your blanks? All right. I'm going to start at 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. If you want to get the first information, be here at 6 o'clock. All right? And if you haven't already checked your work, that's going to go away. So please do check that. I thank you for your attention. If you would like your slides, here's my email address, so feel free to email me and I'll be glad to send them.